everyone. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I'm Katrina Pariera. I am a professor in the School of Communication. And I'm just going to briefly kind of talk about an area of research I do, which is sexual communication. So I look at basically how people talk about sex. Whether it's couples, whether it's parents and their children, which I do a lot of research on as well, or whether it is between friendships. I'm also really interested in social norms, how we kind of craft normalcy, how we decide what's normal, whether it's in big peer groups or with our close friends. I always think it's really interesting when we're able to kind of break through something and suddenly start talking about an uncomfortable topic, and it becomes comfortable, and we feel excited, and we feel free to talk about things, and it's kind of a good feeling. So I'm going to talk about some of my research specifically in how social norms get developed around sexual communication, specifically with friends. And part of this is because it turns out our friends are the main people that we talk to about sex. We actually talk more to our friends than to our sexual partners, and some of the research I've done and other research has shown that. We also talk to our friends to sort of make sense of sexuality, to troubleshoot, to problem solve, to talk about what's okay, what's acceptable, what's typical, what's common. We do some comparing of things. And so we kind of create our own norms with our friend groups, right? You can think of your own friends and like what kind of things you talk about and don't talk about. And that's really what I wanted to look at for this study that I'm going to mention. And these norms really matter because they kind of dictate our behavior. If we feel like something is unacceptable, it's not normal to talk about, we are a lot less likely to talk about it. So I look specifically at women because, of course, women face a lot of double standards around sexuality, and because research also shows that women talk about sex more than men do, which is not really what the stereotype is. A lot of research shows they have pretty complex, ambivalent attitudes about sex. They talk more about sex, but they're also punished more for talking about sex. And some of this peer approval we might get from our friends can be a really powerful buffer against some of the social judgment we might get for talking about sex outwardly, I suppose, or more publicly. Also, sexual communication overall is good. People who talk about sex practice safer sex. They're more sexually satisfied. They have higher sexual self-esteem. They're more likely to access sexual resources, things like that. So it's generally good for us. And so I wanted to know essentially like what are women talking about? What do they feel like they can talk about? What do they feel like they can't talk about with their friends? And part of what this is about, what I'm kind of hinting at here, are social sanctions. So the way social norms operate is we act within a norm because we fear that if we don't, we will experience some kind of sanction. We'll be judged or ridiculed or shunned if we don't kind of fall in line with a norm. And underneath these sanctions are underlying rationales that sort of support why the norm is in place, like why we should shun somebody for disobeying a norm, essentially. And so rationales, they're not necessarily cogent, but they're sort of our underlying reasons why we enforce norms. So for example, if you think of like casual sex is often considered sort of outside the norm for many people. And the rationale for that, it might be that, it leads to an increase of STIs, which isn't good for society, or, it's just immoral, which isn't good for society, whatever it might be. So we have these kind of underlying reasons. I'm sorry, I wore a wool sweater and it's definitely giving me an allergic reaction. Apologies for that. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to look at for this particular study. What are women talking about? What are they not talking about? What sanctions do they fear? And what are the underlying rationales for those sanctions? So this isn't a traditional research talk. I'm going to skip all the detailed methods and technical results. I'll just say that I surveyed a bunch of women in the US. I can, of course, talk a lot more about that. But first of all, I essentially found that they're not talking too much about sex with their friends, with their close female friends. I just looked at sort of women talking to women. Their main topic they did talk about was birth control, which makes sense. It's a relatively safe topic. But I asked them across a series of 17 topics, do you wish you could talk more? Do you think you should talk more? And across all 17 topics, they said, yes, I wish I could talk more about all of these things. And some of them were pretty spicy. I also asked, do you think it's beneficial when you talk to your female friends about sex? They all said yes. It brings me closer to them. It helps me better understand myself. It makes it easier even to talk to my own partner as well. So they found it very beneficial. I also asked, do you think it should be normal? And they said, yes, I wish it was normal. So they want more, all of this great stuff. And I should pause really quick and say women are not one group of people. So I did look at differences by age. My participants were 18 to 77, so quite a variation of age. I looked at age, sexual and romantic orientation, religion, internalized shame, education, political ideology. I kind of found some small differences. Nothing huge, so I'm not going to touch on anything. I was actually surprised the differences were relatively small. So I asked, well, what are the sanctions that you fear? And they had a lot. Most women, I think, averaged about 3 negative reactions they would anticipate if they brought up a sex-related topic to a friend that they didn't normally talk about. The big ones were, that their friends would judge them, that their friends would think they were gross, too sexual, that their friends would tell other people what they had said, that their friends would just generally sort of be pretty uncomfortable with everything and pretty judgmental. So then I also asked, okay, well, why? And I asked this actually with a quantitative and qualitative question, because it's hard for people to think about, like, why? Why can't I talk about this stuff? And a lot of the reactions to why were kind of moral in nature, which is what I would expect. It's just, it's good girls don't do this, it's immoral, it's bad, it's against my culture, it's against my religion. But I just want to talk about 2 other underlying rationales that I thought were really fascinating. The first was that a lot of the women said it's gross, it's disgusting, it's revolting to talk about these things. And that's really interesting. It's, disgust is a very human, normal reaction. It keeps us from danger and keeps us from illness. And sex typically involves things that might be disgusting, right? Bodily fluids and genitals and things like that. So it's a very normal reaction, but it kind of shows that part of the tabooness of this communication is cyclical in nature because we are not desensitized to it. We don't get to experience or witness really comfortable conversations, and so they sort of stay disgusting or garner a strong reaction. If we're exposed to something more and more, it becomes less disgusting to us. So I thought that was really interesting, and it's kind of like the heart of my research. This silence begets shame, which begets more silence, which begets more shame, and it just kind of becomes this circle. And then the last rationale I found super fascinating was that a lot of the women in my study said, I don't know why. We just don't. You just don't talk about it. Never thought about why, but you just don't do it. That was a very, very common theme in this project. And essentially it says that we might be kind of operating with norms that we haven't really interrogated or thought about. From a communication perspective, this is great because what it tells me is that we might actually benefit from just really some reflection and discussion of the why of it all. Essentially, we might benefit from meta conversations, which means, going to your friends and saying, why don't we talk about this stuff? Why aren't women allowed to talk about this stuff? Why is this stuff so taboo? As opposed to just diving in, saying what you want to say and hoping your friends don't judge you and tell everybody what you were talking about. That might actually be really beneficial to dismantling some of these norms. So I want to say also not all sexual communication is positive. Women and people communicate with each other in ways that shame each other and are hurtful and pressure people into acting certain ways. But overall, I think that if some of these norms can be dismantled a little bit and things can be normalized, people will have a better understanding of the variety and diversity of sexuality. They'll better be able to address various problems and issues they might be dealing with if they have their friends to turn to. So I just will conclude by saying, go talk to your friends about why you don't talk about whatever it is you don't talk about. Just have the why conversation about it. You don't have to talk about the thing, just the why about the thing. I got a little picture of some of my besties. And thank you to the Division of Research and Innovation. And also thank you to my 2 student undergrad researchers, Maggie Job and Aaliyah Blasband, who will be my co-authors on this paper. So thank you. Questions? Hi.
Hi, thank you. So I wonder if you maybe could just elaborate a little bit on that emotion of disgust and how it plays into this, because disgust is it manifests behaviorally very differently than like dislike or fear or indifference. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit more. I mean, if there's a clinical manifestation of disgust specifically that you identified, or if this is something that you're pulling out of your observations, maybe just elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, so it was a new finding to me. I've done a lot of other research in this domain, and disgust hadn't come up, so I really dove into it for this study. And there is a pretty sort of clinical definition of it. That's why I kind of mentioned this maybe sort of evolutionary almost explanation. I usually avoid those explanations, but evolutionary explanation, disgust makes sense. It keeps us from, I don't know, eating out of the trash or something. But I haven't really dove into it before. What was coming up a lot in this study, and I might be getting a little off topic from your question, but like I was starting to look for words like disgust, revulsion, gross, and they just came up so much in so many different comments. And a lot of people even just said, like, it's gross, I'm disgusted by myself, that I think about this thing, or that I have this issue, or something like that. And if I'm disgusted by myself, then other people will be disgusted by me. So I think even the clinical definition sort of falls short of how complicated the idea of disgust is. But it's kind of new to me as a concept. I'm surprised it hasn't come up for me before. But yeah, a lot of really interesting comments from women. And I'm planning a second study now that is looking more into that. Like, where does that disgust come from? Is it you picturing something when your friend is talking about it? Is it just a general type of disgust? And can that disgust be diminished by sort of exposure therapy, so to speak? Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious about the relationship between communications about sex and then communications about love. And, love is probably not as taboo as sex.
Yeah.
It really doesn't invoke these feelings of disgust. And I'm just curious in terms of interventions and just framing, if that might be a way to abstract away from the concreteness of the act, or anyone's ever talked, because that's like a huge love and relationships, and if that's an entry point, if anyone's looked at how that might minimize the shame or taboo.
It's like a workaround kind of, So I don't know about love, but two things come to mind. One is that I just anecdotally, as long as I have been researching this, it's come up in little ways in other studies. And anecdotally, I have noticed that health is a good workaround. Like, sex is part of our health. Oh, sex is good for my migraines. These kinds of like women, I think often it's easier for them to discuss sex when it's like, it's for my health. It's not for any, sexual reason. It's like better for my, cholesterol or something. It's kind of a workaround. But you also mentioned, there was something you said that I wanted to speak on, which was what? Sorry, I'm forgetting the first part. You just like triggered a thought I wanted to say. But the health is a really common workaround. And then another issue that kind of came up that this also did remind me of is that some participants were like, well, the friends know my partner, and that's kind of the real issue. And that's not a social norm, that's more idiosyncratic. And so, but I think it's really interesting to explore that too. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. I did a study a couple years ago that looked at also how women were talking about sex, and I did find they were talking more about the emotional aspects of their relationships than anything concrete or instrumental or anything like that. So they were, in that study, women were like, we talk about sex, but it's more about like the emotional side of things. So I think that kind of relates to the love part. Like that was more of sort of a safer area as well. Let's see, how about back here?
Yeah, thank you for your talk. So I was curious about whether or not you investigated like the nuance of friendships, right? Where you can have like, because you mentioned, this is a picture of me and my besties, right? But often the tendency to think, it's with my bestie that I might talk about these things. But you just mentioned something that kind of relates to it, that it's like, the closer you are with a certain person, maybe they know your partner or your family, and so then it's like, whether or not women be more willing to talk with people they actually don't know as well, right? And so whether or not there's a scale of friendship, and whether or not that came up in any of the interviews that you did.
It didn't come up, so this was a quantitative survey, but I am planning a qualitative study so I can interview people about that. I kind of just shy away from the technical side of trying to figure out like who are the friends that you talk to, and like social network analysis is really difficult. But I think I did a few pilot studies that were qualitative, and that kept coming up. I was like, well, it kind of depends on the friend, and depends how well the friend knows my partner, depends how long we've known each other. And so I think I'm gonna plan a study probably next year that would be a deeper dive into those really nuanced relationships. Because yeah, I don't think it's the same for any group of friends. For this study, I tried to just encourage women to just like think of, you know, the three friends that you talk to the most frequently and are kind of the closest to, just to give some sort of parameters so they weren't thinking of everyone. But I suspect, you know, the answers are quite different depending on which friends they're thinking of. You know, we all have different groups. Sometimes it's a group, sometimes it's one person. So it muddies the waters. This is kind of just like the quick preview, and now I think I need to dive in a little bit more. Yeah.
If I understood it correctly, you established very clear descriptive norm.
Mm-hmm.
Sex is not to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And that norm is widely shared.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't talk about sex and I don't hear others talk about sex, then we know
Mm-hmm.
sex is not to be talked about. But you also mentioned that sex is a very desirable topic of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is this: if this is so, are your respondents aware that that desirability is shared by others? Which will suggest to me that there is this strong prescriptive norm,
Mm-hmm.
which is out there, but people are not aware of it.
Yeah.
Or is there something more to this?
Yeah, I didn't ask them specifically if they also thought other women wanted that. And I think it's a really important question. I really just was like, this study was too big. And so I was like, we'll deal with that in another study. So I'm working on my next quantitative study where I want to look at both, like, do you think your friends also want to talk about these things, as you said? And I also am really curious about like those fears of sanctions they have. I don't know if they're born out of reality. Like maybe they tried to talk about something once and they got embarrassed and everybody was grossed out. Or maybe it's just a perception that it will happen. And so I also kind of want to explore like how have people responded? What responses have you actually seen or remembered? Do you remember a time where somebody got shut down for talking about something they weren't supposed to talk about? Because I'm very curious if it's just a guess that they'll get in trouble, so to speak, or if, you know, it's coming from like a bad experience that they've had. My guess is that it's more perceptual, right? That they just haven't tried it and then they're like, they just assume the worst kind of. So I think that's definitely worth exploring, because that also paves the way for more interventions too. Like we can correct misperceptions. If you think your friends are all gonna hate you for talking about something and they won't, that's good information to have. So yeah, thank you. And I know we ran out of time, but if you have more questions, just come find me. Thank you.